welcome to Season 2 of the award-winning Bites and Bytes Podcast. I'm your host, Kristin Demoranville. Today we're joined by David Hatch from Neogen. David shares his unique perspective on how hackers and pathogens mirror each other and the importance of proactive food safety, data security, and the future of cybersecurity and protecting critical infrastructure. Prepare for a dynamic discussion filled with insights on data, technology, and collaboration in securing the systems that feed our world. Let's jump into my conversation with David. Hi, David. Thanks for joining the show today. I'm going to do what I always do first, is jump straight into favorite food and favorite food memory.
Well, hello, Kristin, and thanks for having me. I'm going to go way back because it was a foundational food moment for me in my youth. I was probably 8 or 9. I think I was probably 9. Mm-hmm. My dad, who is both a foodie and a wine, I'll say, enthusiast.
Love that.
Yeah. He handed me a very small pour of whatever red wine he was having at the time. Mm-hmm. And he said, what I want you to do is have a sip of this wine. And as a 9-year-old, I hated it, right? First sip of anything alcoholic, you're like, what is this? Yeah. And he said, and he cut me a nice piece of the steak he had on his plate. He said, now take a bite of this and now sip the wine.
Love that.
And my world changed forever in that moment, because you have something that's meant to go together. And my dad, he tried making wine for a while and it was awful.
Yeah.
At least that's my memory of it. But the experiences that he had have led me on this journey in my life where I've become a wine enthusiast and certainly a foodie. And then in meeting my wife, who worked at different gourmet establishments, it's just been part of life. But that was my favorite food moment because it has stuck with me my whole life.
Favorite food and favorite food memory together. Nobody has ever said that together. So that's amazing. Yeah, okay. You're my first.
Well, what was yours? I'm just curious.
So I actually have never answered this on air, but everyone knows I'm a wine lover. So that's easy.
Okay.
And I feel like I came to wine in a similar way where I thought it was disgusting for a very long time. I don't know what my problem was, to be honest. I think palates have to refine as you grow. But I have now reached a level where people ask me what my favorite wine is, and they're expecting me to name a brand or a house. Mm-hmm. And I'll say a grape variety. Yep. Like Petit Verdot is what I'm stuck on at the moment. I don't know why I bought it. And it's not actually a grape that tends to be a single bottle. It's usually a blending grape. So it's a very weird one for me to like. I've also been a big fan of Pinotage, which is basically the table wine of South Africa, for a very long time. I like really mineral heavy red wines. But I will say, David, that as I grow older, probably champagne is becoming probably the preferable, but not house. I like grower. I like grower champagnes because it's a different small batch variety. It's the same quality as a house wine. So like as an example, Dom Perignon is a house wine, but I prefer grower wines, which is the grower who grew the grapes that made the house wine. So I like, original source, I guess is what I'll say. I also just really like finding those kind of like moments of really bright, beautiful wines that nobody's ever heard of or hasn't tried because it's not mainstream. Exactly. Non-mainstream wine is what I like.
So I think we should welcome everyone to this wonderful wine podcast that you've started.
Yes, I probably should have a whole segment on wine. I'm reaching out to the wine industry. Someday they will be here. We'll talk about wine, food safety, and things like that. So I'm very excited about that. When that moment happens, full circle, I'll look back to this.
I'll make a unique segue for you because, one of the things I think you'll agree with, and I'm hearing it in your words, is the incredible variety of wines and food in the world means that we can have fun exploring these things for the rest of our lives. And there's still going to be more we don't know than we know, right?
That's right.
And I find that to also be true with information security. And I spent some time learning about it in my career and then being a practitioner of it now in my career. And I find I have the same feeling like, my gosh, it evolves faster than I can learn it.
Yeah, I think I learn something new every day, and that's probably why I stay in it for sure. And there's so many different varieties and knowledge sets and skills across the board, and they're being invented daily, thanks to AI and other different types of machine learning and such.
Now and machines really will be inventing the new things that we have to learn. Interesting.
But they still need a human to prompt in. So I think it's going to change how we view words and how we view commands. I think it's going to change our patterns of behavior in that perspective, because there is a big push for artists and things now, right? Artists are rising in different ways, whether it's bread making or wine making or other various types of art. I think there will be a balance. There has to be that yin and yang.
I read with interest recently, I saw a job posting, and the name of the posting was AI prompter. It's literally a profession now.
Yes.
It pays really well, by the way. I was shocked.
It does. It doesn't.
But as you think about it, right, that's getting the most out of AI requires some creative thinking as well as an understanding of the underlying data and technology. It's really interesting intersection, I think.
Yeah, especially since science as a whole is really interesting. And I consider this definitely a science behind it, obviously. Think about the pioneers in science. You can name a bunch off the top of your head probably, but they all tried something that they thought, hey, let's try this. What if I mix this? Or what if I grow this? Or what's the understanding of how things happen in the process of whatever? I think we're in that type of a renaissance period, I guess is what I'll call it. And I was wondering what was going to happen post-pandemic, because usually that would give a rise to a renaissance. And I guess we're having it in technology, which completely makes sense. I mean, we're here. This is what's going on. Yeah. I just hope we don't lose the manual processes behind things, because that's our rollback when technology fails. That's what I always get worried about when it comes to like disaster recovery and business continuity planning. We
were making our way through a complex set of directions through the GPS device recently, and through downtown Boston in the Back Bay area, where there is absolutely no rhyme or reason to the layout of the streets or the one-way streets. And but at the same time, my wife and I looked at each other and said, what did we do before GPS? We would never have made it through this. We would have ended up following someone who looks like they knew where they were going, maybe. And that was the way we would get somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So it was kind of a moment where we realized we've lost the ability to memorize several turns ahead of directions. We can't do that anymore, right? We're just reliant on technology.
The nice thing about Boston, though, is you can only drive so far east before you drive into the Bay. So, I mean, you have some sense of direction. You're not helpless. Right. But I've often thought that. And I'm sure you've seen the classic meme, that says New York has grids and Boston because F you, with the roads. And it's true. Yeah. It's true. But you got to remember that Boston was all carriage roads. It was pathways. It wasn't a quote manufactured city like New York is, because it was actually built that way. Right. Boston was, traders getting stuff off ships and dragging it out to the rest of the colonies. So I love it like that, though. I love its little windy weirdness. But you're right. It's very much of a pain to navigate. Thank God they finally built some of those tunnels and some of those bridges.
Yeah. Windy weirdness. I think that's a good way to describe our conversation so far. This is why I love my organic conversations here, because I think if you really wanted to hear something else, you would just tune into the news or a news podcast that takes 15 minutes and gives you the top 7 stories, which I do love. But here it's more of connections with people, because food is emotional and cultural and significant. And we should have conversations that are very much like that. But David, why don't you introduce yourself so people actually know who I'm talking to? Who is this guy? So I'm David Hatch, and currently my professional title and role is I'm the Vice President of Digital Solutions Marketing for Neogen Corporation. So a very large public company that operates in the food safety space, global company. I think we operate in 72 countries, and we have one of the largest footprints around the world for food safety testing devices and kits. We have a genomics business. We have an animal health business. I came to this role in this company through my work at a software company, happened to be called Corvium, which Neogen acquired February of 23. And Corvium was kind of the end of a segment of my career that I spent with several different companies in different roles, leading companies. I was the chief commercial officer at Corvium, but I've held CMO roles and other roles at other companies, all in the space of data, of technology, of business intelligence, of analytics and information security. In one particular role I had, I was the CMO at the Institute for Applied Network Security. I ran a research company called the Aberdeen Group, where we had a big information security research practice. So I've spent some time in that realm. I helped start up a security software company called Wind Talker. And that was kind of that was the 1999 to 2007 period of my career, all the way up until 2018 when we started Corvium. I got involved in turning companies around, doing pivots, helping investors make something out of something that might have not done so well in the past. It's kind of
making something out of something. I love it.
Something out of something. Prior to that, I started my life in television, of all places, and a career up in Boston working on the sports broadcast for the Red Sox and Bruins. But it was that experience that gave me my first touch with how data can make a difference in a business.
That's right.
And I'll just tell that story real quick, because it also led to my first brush, even though I didn't know it at the time, with information security. There's a station in Boston, it still exists, called WSBK TV 38. It's back in the day, it owned the broadcast rights to the Red Sox and Bruins and the away Celtics games. And as a result of that, we owned a huge tape library. And this is so far back that it was actually on physical tape, up in a room with the big sliding shelves that slide across the room, a massive library of 1-inch reel-to-reel tapes that came directly from the broadcast units out at the ballpark and the Boston Garden Arena. And around that same time, this little company down in Connecticut had started up called ESPN. We didn't hear, we were like, what? Who's this? Oh, they have a sports desk and they broadcast sports 24/7 on the cable, huh? Wow, that's a crazy idea. They'll never make it. Famous last words. But they would call us up and they would be looking for highlights. And so what we would have to do if we were to say yes to them, and they were willing to pay a lot of dollars per minute to license our highlights. So it was in our interest to say yes. We would have to go to another room where we had 3-ring binders full of paper. And those of us in the food industry listening in now are going to start to see how this relates. Don't we all have those 3-ring binders full of paper, right? And the industry, in the food industry right now, is in the process of digitizing that data. Well, that's where we were back in the day in television, because for me to say yes to ESPN, I'd have to have an intern physically turn the pages and find the tape number and the time code of the highlight that they wanted. And then we would microwave beam it, because there was no internet.
Yep.
I'm really old, right? There was no internet. And so most of the time we'd have to say no, because there wasn't enough time to do all that research and load up the tape and find the good camera angle and send them the highlight. Well, at the time, my wife was working at International Data Corporation, which is a research firm. And she was bringing home this research about this new technology called a relational database. And I was like, what's that? So I learned about it and realized very quickly, hey, if we put all the data that's in those 3-ring binders into a database, we would take the research step from 6 hours down to like 6 seconds.
Yeah, you can just query it then. Yeah.
Right. So we built a query engine database specifically to look up sports highlights.
Awesome.
Now, how does this connect to everything? So I very quickly realized and understood that if you make data searchable, you make it accessible and searchable, it has value.
Yeah.
And we also found out very quickly, if you do that, other people are going to want it.
Yes.
And so you have to protect it, especially if it becomes a financial asset to your business. That led me out of television and into actually a competing research company. So my wife and I sat at the dinner table looking across at each other, not being able to talk about work, which was fun because we competed. But I ended up running a publications business looking at publishing research about data technology. And I did that so I could learn more because now I was in brain candy land for me. I love learning about technology. I love learning about things I've never discovered before. And I've had a series of those experiences along the way at research companies, software companies. I mentioned the Institute for Applied Network Security. And that led me to my last startup or turnaround company, Corvium, which was formed specifically to digitize food safety testing data, to automate the workflow of collecting that data, and to present it back to food safety professionals in a way that was more usable than an Excel spreadsheet or a 3-ring binder. And along the way, I started to like say, okay, how do I express the value of this? And that's when you and I think first met it was a while ago now, but
yeah, it was like 3 years ago at the Food Safety Consortium. So,
yeah. And I said, hey, my background in talking about how we deal with hackers and different attack vectors on our data led me to start thinking about pathogens in that same way.
We connected again this past Food Safety Consortium, and it was just a casual conversation. You said that pathogens are like hackers, and I was like, wait, what? And I have a background in environmental management, and obviously I have a love for biology because it's connected to all the things that I love, like wine and animals. Yeah. But I would love for you to explain and kind of elaborate on that analogy of how pathogens are like hackers. And I'm sure you'll make the relation for food safety. So go for it, David.
Well, yeah, it was actually my attempt at understanding things because at the time I had all this background in data management, information security, and all the experiences I'd had. I had never worked in food safety before, and I didn't know much about it. But as I learned, what we all do is we draw parallels from our past, and we try to relate to the experiences we've had. And that I said to our CEO and my partner the words I said to you. Pathogens are like hackers. And he said the same thing you said back to me. What do you mean by that? And I said, well, think about it. Like a pathogen, like a hacker, only has to find one way in to do damage and to really mess up process, right? And as food safety professionals, like information security professionals, we have to take care of all the ways in, not just the one way that the pathogen or the hacker finds. And the other parallel I realized as I thought this out a little bit, I said, just like a hacker, when you defeat a pathogen and you figure out the sanitation protocol, the chemicals, the whatever it is, right? The new cleaning regimen, what happens? Well, the pathogen mutates. It changes. It changes its attack vector. You get a new strain. You get one that's resistant to the old way of dealing with it. And the same thing with hackers. They always adapt, right? They find a new way in. And then it goes even further, right? You think about what are the attack vectors in information security, and one of the most prevalent ones is not a hacker. It's actually your own team. It's people who click on the email inadvertently, or it's maybe a disgruntled employee who purposefully is causing issues. Well, in the same way, we have people who don't wash their hands. And we've heard all kinds of horror stories, right? And we have pathways through our facilities that by their very nature are going to track in contaminants, right? So the parallels just keep going and going. And I thought to myself, hey, my background actually might apply to what I'm doing now is if I think about. So a part of my job is to help our organization understand the importance of information security, because when you think about, a lot of the records that Neogen has, and we have hundreds and hundreds of implementations of software that we provide our customers called Neogen Analytics. And that software is instrumental in unifying and collecting all of this testing data across a myriad of sources, testing devices, labs, and inevitably what we have is very sensitive data. We have pathogen data and amongst other things. And of course, the last thing any of our customers want is to have their name or brand associated with, well, first of all, with an outbreak, but then a hack.
Data breach.
With a breach. Thank you. So I mean, it's served me well, I think, having that background to think about this in a way that, frankly, I think the industry is not really as up to speed on the technology or even the concepts and thinking and the techniques of information security.
Hey there, and thank you for tuning in to the award-winning Bites and Bytes podcast. Whether you're a first-time listener or a long-time fan, I appreciate you being part of this journey. If you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to like, comment, and share. It really does make a difference. Plenty more insightful and thought-provoking discussions ahead, so stick around. Now let's jump back into the conversation.
No, I think the industry as a whole is just adding without the regard of the consequences around it, which is kind of hilarious because we are constantly combating consequences, right? We're very much we're not as proactive as we should be. And I'm not saying not everybody is proactive. However, the trend is that we're really good at handling crises, right? We're really good about cleaning up. We're really good about the after effect, but we need to be better on the proactive. So I'm glad to hear that you're making connections. And this is what I talk about all the time. Your past informs your present, and it will also inform your future. And just because you were a server in a restaurant, or you worked with gorillas, or you got a degree in environmental management doesn't mean it doesn't apply to cybersecurity. And I totally just outed myself there. Wink, wink.
Yeah.
But the nice thing is that you've made that connection. And I immediately resonated with that when you said it, and not just because we're both Bostonians. So, I mean, that does help as well because we carry that with us wherever we are.
That's right.
But I love that. And I think the parallels between cybersecurity and the pathogens is really kind of an awesome concept, because it definitely can be a rallying cry, because we understand that, and both on the food safety side and the cybersecurity side. Mm-hmm. And hackers are constantly updating it and inventing and figuring they are ahead of us in so many ways. We're playing catch up half the time. And now that they have the hacker gangs and they have these facilities that are shell companies that look completely normal, and they have marketing teams, and they have HR teams and all these other things, but they're really just a front for a hacking gang, is incredible to me. And I'm assuming pathogens have gotten that kind of complex in their own right. Not that they have corporations. I mean, maybe they do. I don't know. But I think that
like
is
sometimes, I think. Yeah.
I'm sure. So I appreciate that. So from your perspective, with all the digital solutions that are running around, and the fact that we're constantly having to update and both protect and compliance aspects, as well as protection against biological and cyber threats, what do you think the future is going to look like, David, just in your perspective? Because I mean, we've already seen so much change in the last few decades, but what do you think is going to happen moving forward in terms of both the food safety aspect with the pathogens and then tech around it?
I think about it a lot, and it has changed a lot. In just the 6 years I've been involved in food safety, it has changed a lot. Mm-hmm. I'll say, first of all, if I take an outside looking into an organization perspective, and then I'll take the reverse as well. But if I think about the future, one of the things that over the past 6 years I've seen changing, and I've seen an understanding be gained, is gained within this industry, is there was a lot of resistance at first to cloud. And a lot of food companies are very hesitant to allow any of their food safety data outside of the four walls of their facilities, until you start digging away and you start asking questions like, hey, where does the data go when your external lab service sends you diagnostic results? How do they send that to you? Mm-hmm. Right? And invariably the answer is, oh, I get a COA, a certificate of analysis, in an email attachment, PDF. So they're attaching a PDF to an email. Is that email encrypted? Is the file encrypted? Mm-hmm. And more than 80% of the time, the answer to both is no. And you quickly get to the realization that the amount of information security measures and acumen that's in place within the industry right now is not aligned to what the fears of leadership are regarding the protection of that information. Mm-hmm. Well, over time, so putting it in the cloud has been perceived as being more dangerous. Well, over time, we've gotten around that. And the way we've gotten around that is to show that, well, when you're dealing with a cloud connection, that connection can be secure, and the data that's resident in the server that you're actually attaching to, it is somewhere, can be protected, and the communication back and forth can be protected. And if you're working with a company that actually has and is steeped in information security acumen and capabilities, you actually have a higher chance of protecting that information than you do if you're just relying on whatever IT team you have to set up your email server, which, as we know in the food industry and most food companies, is not where the investment is being spent.
Correct.
So one of the things I'm seeing is, to answer your question about the future, is there is now a movement finally in this industry to modern day cloud computing, to both increase efficiency of communications and speed up that time to information and automate some of the the interactions that are happening. Why wait for someone to open an email, print out a PDF, put it in a 3-ring binder, go get it on Monday to use it for a management meeting? Why wait for that? When as soon as that result's available from the LIMS system at a lab, boom, it's in your system and it's already triggered your corrective action, right? So there's this automation that becomes possible with cloud computing. And I think the food industry is one of the industries I see coming in last place in terms of adopting this kind of technology. I've seen it already adopted in healthcare. I've seen it adopted in the financial services world and travel, right?
Sure.
I mean, when's the last time that you balanced your checkbook by hand?
When was the last time you wrote a check?
When's the last time you wrote a check, right? That digital transformation happened a couple decades ago, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Healthcare, the electronic health record. When was the last time you walked into a doctor's office and saw that wall of colored folders with all our medical records sitting there?
It's true.
Right? That was gone. Now that was more recent, but that was a digital transformation we went through. And the food industry is going through that same digital transformation. It's done so with like manufacturing operations automation and robotics, but it hasn't done so in one of the most critical areas and riskiest areas of the business, food safety testing. But it's getting there now. And that's what I've witnessed. And I think that's accelerating. That's going to be the future that we see happen.
I can't agree with this more. I think there's so many different layers and segments to the food industry. And a lot of times I spend on this podcast speaking about food production and manufacturing and agriculture, because that's easier to digest when it comes to tech. Like, everybody understands precision farming for the most part. Even if you don't know what it is, you understand it involves technology or robots that are doing various tasks inside of food production facilities. I mean, there's TV shows dedicated to inside the factory, that kind of stuff. But when it comes to the actual data in labs, people probably just assumed that already upgraded already, or they don't even think about it because they didn't realize their food had to be tested so intensely, which kind of makes me laugh because we're so disengaged from our food system anyways. Why would you even think that, I suppose? But you're completely right.
No one wants to go out to dinner with us, Kristin, because if we start talking about this stuff, they're like, I don't want to think about that.
Oh, it's such an interesting world. And it's so incredible that as cybersecurity and information security in general, because the terms are different, but we're going to blanket them for cybersecurity today. I think we haven't thought it all the way through. We think digital transformation as ERP systems, which are important, and they are part of the food testing environment because they do get uploaded. And I think it's also really incredible that we haven't reached that level of understanding of how important data is. It's not just this arbitrary thing that's like out there now. It's really important to our daily lives. I mean, how many times breaches in the news? How many times have various systems been hacked? It happens quite frequently and daily. It's not just when it's going to, if it's going to happen, it's a when it's going to happen moment. And I think that we really need to take a long, hard look at what are we doing with this data? Why do we need to put it into a digital format? Is it safe to put into digital? Do we need to keep some things on-prem? Those kind of conversations need to happen. How do we segment? What does that look like? Those conversations are super important to have. And I think the food industry is still trying to figure that out in a way when it comes to safety data or testing data or scientific data. Because let's talk about formulations, right? Our food is not right out of the ground anymore. We're literally making things and preservatives. Yeah, it's heavily processed. And I learned this by spending some time in quality labs. I said this recently on air as well, but I think it's incredible. I walked into one of the labs at a bakery company and I said, hey, what smells in here? And they're like, oh, it's the preservatives test. And I was like, wait, what are you talking about? And they had different layers of cake in different forms of decomposition to figure out how long the preservatives last. And I said, why are you doing that? And they said, because people. And I looked at them and I said, people would eat this? They're like, people do all kinds of things. And I don't know if you saw the latest news, David. I think it came out in the last day or so from when we recorded this. But it was some kind of crazy amount of butter just got recalled at Costco.
I did not see that yet, no.
Because it didn't have the label milk on it. They had to recall it.
Right.
And I had a few friends that messaged me and they said, this is silly. Why? Everybody knows butter's made from milk. And I said, no, they don't. Number one, because our food is so processed and we're so far removed. They don't know that. Two, by law, it has to be on there because of allergens. because of dairy allergens, because somebody could turn around and sue the company. But if the recall's out, they can't turn around and sue, even though it's a volunteer recall, of course. And I thought, oh my goodness, we are so far removed from this that we don't even realize that how butter's made, which is such an absurd thing to say. But we're at this place. So if we can't get that right, David, I always wonder how we're going to get through this data, evolution, if you will. And I was watching the documentary Poison that our good friend Dr. Darren was in. And do you remember the part when they were scraping the side of the eggs with like a little tester that they inserted into this mobile device? And they showed some of the mobile device, and I immediately, as a cybersecurity person, was like, no, don't show these things. Like, we don't need to give people, more information to get to stuff. But I thought, if we're already using that kind of tech that's clearly feeding directly to a Wi-Fi device that's probably going to a database in the cloud, what are we doing to protect all of that? From the network to the device to the data. And of course, my brain was so focused on that, I missed the whole like chicks on conveyor belt moment, which everybody got upset about.
That's upsetting, right? These cute, fuzzy little creatures that we're breeding to eat. But what you're talking about, that's the exact business I'm involved in now. The digital solutions group at Neogen oversees all of the software in the business, not just the testing workflow automation and analytics that I mentioned, but also think about like the operating system on that device that you mentioned. And how that works and the way it connects to Wi-Fi and what other security measures you have built in to that. And we have 8 different device platforms across sanitation verification testing, indicator organism testing, pathogen testing, allergen testing, genomic testing, you name it. We're involved in it, and we have to be thinking about those things. And that second part to my answer about the future that you asked about has to do with everything you just talked about.
Hey, cyber community, are you ready to level up? Because Wicked 6 is back, and this time it's bigger and bolder. Woo-hoo! March 28th through the 30th, it's a 3-day global virtual hack and chat event where women worldwide come together to play games, compete, learn, and connect. We've got international speakers, technical talks, hands-on workshops, and of course, the cyber games. Think Capture the Flag, Attack and Defend, and High Stake Teams Tournament, all streamed live over 3 days. Whether you're just starting out or a seasoned pro, there's a challenge for you. Plus, there's also networking, prizes, merch, and so much more. Right now, the registration is only $25 US, but don't wait, prices are going up on March 1st. If you've got a great story to share, consider applying to be a speaker or host a workshop. Want to show what a cybersecurity career really looks like? Submit a day in a life video. Want to get involved? We're also looking for volunteers, referees, and challenge developers to help make this event even more amazing. And if you're a company looking to sponsor the future of women in cybersecurity, check out our sponsorship opportunities.
Sounds good. Okay.
Head over to wicked6.com to sign up. All the details and links are in the show notes. Let's level up together.
And we hear a lot of talk about AI and machine learning.
Yes.
We hear a lot of talk about the potential for that. And one thing we've all learned is that these are very data hungry techniques. They require a lot of data and they're called learning sets, right? And for the machine to learn, it needs to be told what data to look at, how to look at it, what queries that it can make itself to its own data. We're getting into that. We're looking at it. But the fact is that most of the data is still not digitized. And when I say digitized, because it's in an Excel spreadsheet doesn't mean it's truly available in a digital format. It is in a file that is somewhere, but it's probably not connected. It's probably not in a database where it's connected and integrated with other data. And this is where I think things get really interesting is we're going to start seeing, like right now, we've developed the ability we can teach a machine to look at itself, look at its own data, understand what the rules are. The rules are, I can't have a bacteria count over X. Or if a non-conformance happens and it's in a zone 1, then these 3 people need to know, and you need to launch this corrective action protocol, right? So we're starting to teach the machine not just how to learn from the data and how to alert us when it learns, but also to actually trigger actions.
Yes.
And this is the promise of AI. But I'll use some other examples from other sectors, but very much related to food. You've got to protect that, because a bad actor, and what I'm seeing now with what's happening in geopolitics and around the world, we're seeing now that the realization that people can really impact and affect the basic necessities of life. Our water treatment plants are controlled through the internet now. Our power grid is controlled through the internet. And our food industry is now more and more going to be controlled through the internet and things like I just talked about. And if you can change the ratio of chemicals being added at a water treatment plant or open and close valves remotely, then a hacker can do that too. Yep. If you can change the flow of power across the grid, a hacker can do that too. We already saw, if you remember, Stuxnet. Someone, we won't name who.
We have air quotes.
We have air quotes going right now like crazy. Someone was able to shut down nuclear power generation in Iran remotely, right? So could someone also get into the machine learning going into food safety and alter that such that a company thinks everything's okay when it's not? Or maybe they can cause disruption and say, you've got all these hits for pathogens when there aren't, and send us all into useless work, right? So I think about that all the time. It's what keeps me up at night. Little things keep me up at night. You mentioned labeling. Every sample pack, every sample that's collected in a food processing plant, all the sampling for pathogens, sampling for organisms, sampling for allergens, all of those samples get labeled. And they get labeled with a label number, and there might be a test number on it. There might be another marking on it indicating, what is this test for? Is it for listeria? Is it for salmonella? And that goes to the lab. And a lot of those labels are handwritten. And so they get to the lab, and the lab tech looks at it and says, is that a 7 or a 1? Yeah. And so they call the customer. You just sent me 10 packs. I'm looking at number 7, or is it number 1? What am I looking at? And the person says, that was Kristin who wrote that down. Let me see if she's here, because I can't read her handwriting either. Yeah. Oh, Kristin's on vacation. Uh-oh. Yeah. Or worse yet, they don't call. That's a 7, they think, and it's a 1, right? So we have this, now we have a digitized label. We can get around that problem, only we might have created another problem, which is the vulnerability of that data, right? So you always have to be thinking about where are the gaps in the process, in the information process, right? So there's information security, and you're right, cybersecurity is different. The way that gets attacked is cybersecurity. Thinking about how to secure that information that you own, that's information security, right? So it keeps me up at night for sure. Do I have an answer to it? No, I don't.
Yeah, I've unfortunately seen a lot of this spoofed in labs, and we already have examples of happening in the real world of this exact thing that you're talking about's happened. And it's here. It's not a movie situation. It's not a speculative thing. It's happening. And it's scary because people don't want to believe in it, if you will. There's almost like this whole, and as you were talking, I was thinking about the disinformation, misinformation campaigns that are all around the geopolitical and all around these other things. We've already seen that happen in so many places. And it's in the food industry, it's prevalent. Again, going back to the butter being recalled, because people should know that milk is in it automatically. Should they though? I mean, I have questions. I think if it's printed, it's much more believable than if it is not. But then again, you get into the misinformation around it. Well, it's the motivation
for printing that? Yeah.
And not all hackers or not all bad actors are out for financial. Some of them are out there just to be disruptive because of nation state. It's hacking as a service is a thing now, that kind of thing. And it's scary to me that as human beings, we're so bad to each other that we're now attacking food systems. Come on. It is a system. It's connected to other systems. If you mess with that system, it's going to affect other things. It's actually going to make it worse all around. And you're just going to create chaos ultimately. And I think as I was listening to David, I was thinking about how do we start educating people? It's about awareness, right? Not only the general public has to be informed to some degree because data is important for them to understand and what they're doing with it, but also the people who use it. How do you train? Hey, you need to get your numbers correct, or you need to verify and then re-verify. How do we do that? How do we create more of a data-centric positive culture rather than this is all the bad things that are going to happen, but this is all the really great stuff that happens? Do you have any viewpoint on that?
I do. And there is some good news. And I don't want to be a doomsayer and say I don't have a solution for that. I mean, protecting that information once it is digitized is becoming a more and more well-known thing. But it requires that you have people who understand how to do that as part of your organization, right? And that's one of the gaps in the industry that I see. As we get through this digital transformation, we're going to have a trade-off, and we're going to have the gaps that I just mentioned, like that analog writing of a label is a gap that creates a real issue. And so I like to use that example. But we're going to create other issues that we have to anticipate. So I'll give you another example. And this kind of illustrates, I think, both how scary this is, but also the awareness we need to have at a local level and at a national and even at a global level. So, there are companies that make really sophisticated farming equipment. Well, if you've been out to Indiana to a very large farming operation, what you see are massive, the size of small buildings, machines out in the field. And these are very much now computer-controlled devices. And the things that they do are set up that way so that very, very large swaths of land can be farmed properly. Well, in my days as the CMO of the Institute for Applied Network Security, I got to attend a lot of interesting events that scared the heck out of me. and they scared the bleep out of me. And this one story did so, but it also gave me a great example of like how to think about things. So imagine this tractor, and it's the device on the back of the tractor is set up to plant seeds exactly 6.2 inches in the ground after the field has been plowed. And so it's this big array out the back of the machine, and there's all these rods that are pop into the ground, popping these seeds into the ground, and off it goes down the field, down and back, down and back. Only it didn't plant them 6.2 inches in the ground. It planted them 1 inch in the ground. And the rain and the wind swept them away. And now an entire nation's food supply has been impacted. Because imagine if all of those machines were on the same network. Imagine if the data being collected. So now you got to think about and anticipate, because the person that presented this actually wrote it up in a paper and sent it to the Department of Agriculture to say, okay, guys, you need to keep up with the technology that's happening out here in the world, and we need to be able to defeat this. And maybe sometimes establishing that unified network of all this data together is not a good idea, because you've opened up an opportunity and a vulnerability to get at everything at once. And we can't have that. As one of the largest agricultural food producing nations in the world, we especially can't have that. There's 335 million people who kind of like to eat every day, right? So how do you defeat? Well, sometimes you have to look at it and say, actually, if we compartmentalize this, we can at least reduce a problem down to something that's not going to impact the entire supply chain for whatever that food type is. And we got to think about that the same way, because we're not talking about a pocket industry here. We're talking about the world's largest industry. And we got to think about how we keep control of things, which is why I think a lot of food companies are very much keeping their data close to their vest and saying, I don't want it out there.
First of all, I applaud them for having integrity there, because a lot of people don't. We know this. We can name a bunch off the top of our heads probably. But the problem is that the vendors that they use, the third parties, it's not the network. I think what people get confused is they think that it's the network that the tractor's connected to on the farm, which is also a problem. But it's the vendor's connection to the vehicle, right? So that's the issue. We're worried about interception there. It's not necessarily the farm connection. People forget inside these facilities, some of these vendors have connections directly to their product, whether it's the microscope or it's a testing device or it's a production line or it's a robot or any of those things. These vendors have connections in to be able to do firmware updates, upgrades, maintenance, all this other stuff. As a consumer or the company that's purchasing these products needs to read very carefully your user agreements. Do they have connection to us? What are the ingress egress points of my facility? I need to understand where the data is moving, because those visualizations of data swirling around us. But the problem is you can only control what you can control. But if you brought something into your facility, and I have a great example of this, it was a grain factory actually I was at in California, and I walked into one of the production offices and I said, hey, what's that on the wall there? It was a server, had a network cable connected to the wall that was connected to the internet. I said, why is it in a cage? Like, what is this? Is that ours? And they go, oh, no, that's our vendor. And I said, don't you think someone should know about that? And they're like, no, it's a vendor. We trust them. Oh, do you? That's nice. What happens when that vendor gets popped? Are you going to be responsible for what happens in this factory? And this factory had already had issues. People had unfortunately lost their lives. And I keep thinking to myself, I would want to know, as a safety person, as a production manager, any of that, all the things that could potentially hurt my employees as well as anybody else beyond the walls of this building.
Yep.
Or if I'm adding a pathogen to the environment, as an example. I think that we have to start thinking bigger.
Yeah.
And I know that is hard for a lot of people because they just want to go in and do their job and go home and they don't care. I understand that. I respect it as well. But there comes a point where we are going to have to be held responsible for data, and I think that's why people want to keep it to their chest, because they think if they let it out, then they're losing, control.
I hear a lot about this interconnection when we talk about food safety culture, and we do so without including data in that conversation.
Or cybersecurity.
Or cybersecurity, which is, it's all wrapped up into, there's a line item in the culture that has to be, how are you handling the data? Now, the culture, I think, demands the democratization of data. A good food safety culture is one where people understand the impact of what they're doing, and therefore information and data has to be shared so that understanding can be achieved.
Yes, because it's
But
education.
you also have to be careful about how you do that. And so you also have to teach a cybersecurity culture or a data protection culture as well. It's part of that. It's part of that whole equation, and it's not enough there. Now, I come at this also from I am one of those vendors, by the way, right? So it really hits home when you say those words. They're not hurting words. They're like, it makes me remember the ethics I have to always have around this. And when we started out down this road, because I had a background in both data technology, data management, and security, I was able to see, okay, we need to address this because we're going to have access to this data. Only I can't have access and be able to identify who this data belongs to. Yeah. So one of the things we've decided is we are only going to have access to de-identified data. So one of the things you can do to protect information and to keep it from being useful to both hackers or any bad actor is that anonymization process. Data can be stripped of certain elements of itself as it is shared in the cloud, and you need to have a special decryption key to see the identity. So each one of our customers, for example, they can see their data, right? But I can't. I can't see it unless they bring it up on a screen during a support call or something. I can't see it. What I can see is a whole bunch of aggregated data. Now, I need to see that because I need to train the technology to understand the different behaviors and the different trends and make improvements and be able to build those recommendation engines that I was talking about, right? But there's a balance that has to be struck. And if you're not thinking about that, and if you're working with vendors who aren't thinking about that, then you are actually endangering yourself from those kind of outcomes that we've been talking about. So part of the equation isn't just what are all the technologies I need to deploy that are cybersecurity technologies. It's also some real practical things of sometimes less is more.
That's right.
And what is the data that you're sharing? And is that written out in your agreements and your contracts? You mentioned contract terms. I have had the privilege and the pain of having to write those terms. And that's what I spend a lot of time doing and negotiating and making sure customers understand what they're getting into and what they're not doing. And that's really important. And that's part of the reason why I think the food industry has been so slow to take up adoption of advanced technologies is they don't have the experience and the people necessarily who have these backgrounds and understanding. And if they do, they're in short supply, right? So we have, as vendors in this industry, we have to be more altruistic and do a good job on their behalf. I just believe that. And it's part of the reason why I'm staying at Neogen is because they agreed to take this approach. When they acquired my company, they agreed, we're going to continue to take this approach. We're not going to alter that. We agree with that. And that was a huge milestone for me to make the decision.
It's product security. It's product security that you're really speaking about ultimately. Yeah. And yes. I think a lot of people get confused about what that is because it's a twofold thing. It's the data side, and it also is the physical product itself has to be secure, like an IoT device or those tractors, as we were talking about. I think your journey to this actually started when you were in broadcasting too, because you had to authenticate the clips. You had to make sure what you were showing was accurate to what it was. It wasn't just some arbitrary batting cage moment. It was the proper what they wanted. So you really you took it even prior to the whole cloud internet situation. You were already doing this work then.
We had to own the license to that data. And to share something that we didn't have the license to back then. We're talking 1991, 1990. The understanding of those things back then was non-existent, except that one day in the back of the Sporting News, remember the Sporting News? It was a newsprint paper periodical that came out, and in the back of the Sporting News was an ad, 4 hours of Bobby Orr highlights. Call this number. We're going to send you 4 one-hour VHS tapes of nothing but Bobby Orr highlights. And I knew exactly where that had been pirated from, my tape library.
Yeah.
Someone in our organization who had access to that room dubbed, because we made a special set of Bobby Orr highlights, because of course he's one of the greatest stars in all of the NHL history. Happened to be a Boston Bruin, so we happened to own those broadcast rights. So we took the time to edit together a whole package because we kept getting calls. It was one of the most frequently licensed highlights that we had. And there it was. And we were like, how did this happen? Well, it was a physical breach of security.
Absolutely.
Because that video was not, there was no internet for it to be on, right? But it was an early lesson in information protection or data protection for us. And it was appalling because now it's out there. And once it's out there, it can be rubbed, it can be, it's gone.
Yeah. And I think this is what people don't understand about, specifically ransomware when they're holding your data. They have taken your data and they're going to put it on the dark web and they're going to get a double or triple payout from it. And you have made it too easy. Don't make it easy for people to take your stuff. It's why we lock our doors. It's why we have alarm systems. It's why we do different things. I'm glad that you're using two-factor authentication with your customers. Those kind of things are important. As much as they're super annoying, you have to take 3 extra seconds to enter in a key code, but it keeps your data safe and you don't have to deal with, maybe your job loss or people get hurt. Yeah. That 3 seconds can make the difference. I know that sounds so extreme, but it does make the difference.
It warms my heart when customers ask, do you support single sign-on? And I say, oh, tell me about how you're doing that. And they tell me, and I go, oh my gosh, you guys are employing some good security practices and protocols in your organization. Yes, we can. Of course, we support that. Thank you. Because my fear is always someone's going to log into their system on their smart device and then leave it in the taxi. Right?
It's terrifying.
You can't stop that from happening, but you can if you're using those kind of technologies. Since someone could pick up the phone, but they're not going to have the ability to dual-factor authenticate because they don't know how to do that. And that's a very simple, basic physical thing that you can drop into a security strategy, just like we've done with actually removing some of the data elements from the data that we capture.
David, thank you so much for being here. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate that you've already made that connection in your systems thinking and how the industries need to work together. I do have one last question before we go.
Sure.
Do you think that there'll be more hybrid type roles moving forward in the future, especially when it comes to specializations in food safety and technology, because we are becoming so blended in so many aspects?
I do. And, at the Food Safety Consortium in Washington, where you and I met up again and decided to do this, I was on a panel discussion there with a couple of experts. And one of them was Barbara Kowalczyk from George Washington University. And she's had a long career in teaching and developing curriculum around the answer to that exact question, which is, I think a lot of the next generations and even the generations entering the industry now do have that blended or that hybrid skill set kind of built in. They might not even look at it that way. They're just expecting, I think, that organizations that they're joining will be thinking about these things and will have a need for those skill sets to be built into the job role, an understanding of how technology works.
Right.
And this is from a food safety tech to quality manager to a lab tech to a lab manager. All of those types of roles are now interfacing with technology and data in ways that are new. But the expectation among people that are being hired will be that that's there and that those skill sets are needed. And I think it's going to be driven by these generations entering the workforce more than anything.
Agreed. And I think the flip side in cybersecurity, whether it's operational technology or industrial control systems or any of those other things, we need to know more about the industries that we serve. So if we are interacting with food, if our devices touch food, we're going to need to have a better understanding of food safety and of quality to understand what we're doing. In sanitation too, I mean, obviously. But I think that whole experience is going to really open up. And I'm having more and more conversations that are leaning that way. It has definitely been, I think it's the silver lining in the grossness of the things that I see, and I'm sure you see too, knowing that we're going to shift our perspective and our job descriptions, if you will, to be more eccentric around these things. Yeah. So I'm excited for the future in that regard.
Me
as
too.
much as it's definitely a daunting moment at times, and how are we going to tackle this beast or how are we going to boil the ocean, kind of moment. But
you stirred up another thought that I've been having, and I'll leave you with this.
Sure.
A lot of times food safety teams, the function is thought of as a cost center. We have to comply. And to do that, we have to spend money to make sure we're complying and doing all the right things and we don't get caught. And I hate to say it that way, but that is a lot of the attitude that I'm confronted with as I'm talking with customers they have to look at it that way. But more and more, what I'm seeing are organizations that are coming around to understanding that food safety could actually be an opportunity center. So what do I mean by that? Well, when you can start to see the data, you can start to see things coming out of food safety data that go way beyond compliance to government regulations or to an auditor or to a customer requirement. You can start to see things like, hey, when I see this trend, I know we're headed for another situation where it's going to end up with, I've got to do a full tear down of this device, this grinder, this slicer, whatever it is on my line. Why don't I actually change my maintenance and my cleaning, my sanitation practices now so I can avoid that very expensive outcome later? All of a sudden, the food safety data has triggered an opportunity to save cost, save the company money, directly impacts the bottom line.
Yeah.
That's one example. The more recent example I've had, and this was just this week, I got asked, hey, why did this food safety data and technology end up in the sustainability report of this company? And it was my customer. So I looked into it and found out that, in fact, if you can, with food safety data, you can start to uncover the root causes of what cause waste and scrap. And if you're scrapping less runs, you are using less energy because you don't have to rework that. You don't have to expend the energy to get rid of the stuff you scrapped. And that has a carbon credit impact. That has a carbon footprint impact, which if your company is, let's say, in the meat industry, which is more and more being targeted for sustainability infractions, that's important. And now you can start to see, hey, my food safety function is going to make me more sustainable, and I can start to prove that. And while things in the US may slow down on that front right now, globally, it's a big deal. And if your company operates outside of the US, you care about those things. So right. I'd like to leave you with those thoughts of this data is really vital, not just for compliance, not just because you have to do it, because you should.
Yep.
And so I think that will draw different people into the profession, and people who care about cybersecurity, care about information security, because without that, you're jeopardizing those opportunities now. And that's when you have a financial tie to it, an economic opportunity, that tends to have more impetus than a punitive reason.
Absolutely. I do think that it goes hand in hand with ESG data. I think that it goes hand in hand with risk data. I think that cybersecurity in general and IT need to start paying attention to the fact that we see trends, we see data, because we also have the same problem. We're a cost center, right? We're not viewed as a profit center or an opportunity center. I liked that you said that.
Not often enough, right?
This data, that if people could figure out how to harness this data, whether it's with AI or not, I think would be amazing. And I'm already seeing applications for this and so many products that are about to hit the market or people are thinking about. So thank you for that, David. I do agree with you. I think that this is something we need to look at in a more holistic light. Hopefully we can start changing that focus from cost center to opportunity center. Great. Thanks for your time, David. Really appreciated having you here.
I've loved every minute of it. The time has flown by. I know we've been chatting for a while, but it seems like just a few minutes. So always a good sign.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Bites and Bytes podcast. Big thank you to David Hatch for sharing his insights and experiences. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and share. Your feedback and support mean the world to me. If you have an idea for the show, want to leave feedback, or are interested in being a guest, feel free to reach out. You can send me a direct message on LinkedIn or visit the website to get in touch. As always, stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.